Y'all, I'm sorry. We have to start being honest with ourselves about what Israel is doing. This is absurd. It is unethical. It is unreasonable to refer to this genocide that is happening right now as a war against Hamas.
From the river to the sea, Palestine gonna be free. River to the sea, river to the what? Let's go. River to the.
We're recording this on the 6th of December, my birthday, day 61 of
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I just threw that in there. Day 61 of what started as a Hamas-Israel war in Gaza, but is now kind of includes Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah, and Iranian militias in Syria, and Houthis in Yemen, and now Harvard, MIT, and Penn. And you know where else this war is happening? It's on social media, and specifically on TikTok. It was maybe 20 days into the war, like October 26th. I came across a tweet, an X tweet from a tech executive called Jeff Morris Jr. And it was like something along the lines of the TikTok war. Why do high school students in San Francisco hate Israel so much? That got my attention. I use TikTok on and off. And the last time I used it before the war, it was showing me stuff that I like, rugby, bikini yoga, comedy, more rugby, easygoing, lighthearted stuff. And this tweet was like, why do high school students in San Francisco hate Israel so much? I couldn't get my head around it. One conversation led to another, and I got to you. Anthony Goldblum, thank you very much for getting on the Dejargonizer. Can you just give us a quick minute on yourself?
Yeah, sure. And thanks very much for having me. Anthony Goldblum, my background is as an econometrician / a data scientist. Originally from Australia, I started my career at the Australian Treasury and then the Reserve Bank of Australia. I started a company called Kaggle, which is a large machine learning community. We sold to Google in 2017. I stayed at Google for a little over 5 years and then left to start a new company called Sumble, which is building a knowledge graph for the world's external data. And so we buy and crawl a lot of external data sets. And I'm not going to give you a hard time on the jargon. What did you call it? Sorry, knowledge graph. A knowledge graph. We can do that in another episode. Sure, totally.
But I think it's relevant to, I guess, what you were doing over the past month is you're a data analyst and you were doing data analysis on TikTok, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because my company Sumble buys and crawls a lot of external data for our business. When I saw Jeff Morris Jr.'s tweet, I found it very intriguing, and I felt like I had both the skills, being a data scientist by training, as well as the knowledge of where to get external data sets from that would allow me to actually answer that question. And the first question I was interested in answering after seeing that tweet is, what is the ratio of pro-Palestinian content on actually not just TikTok? I was interested in across social media, so I looked closely at Instagram as well. But what is the ratio of pro-Palestinian versus pro-Israel content? And I sort of went into this thinking, wow, it would be irresponsible if these social media platforms had a ratio of 5 or 10 to 1. And actually turns out the ratio on TikTok is quite a lot higher than that.
And how do you see that? Is that through hashtags?
Yeah, exactly. So normally what people do is they will post a video and they'll very frequently they will attach a description. And as part of that description, they will attach hashtags as well. And very often the hashtag is quite expressive. It will tell you a lot about what is in the video. The number one hashtag with respect to the Israel-Hamas conflict is Free Palestine, hashtag Free Palestine. Mm-hmm. And when you look at those videos, the vast majority of those videos tend to follow certain patterns. They tend to be images from Gaza. There'll be dad holding a teddy bear crying next to a building that has been bombed, or
bear belonged to his son or granddaughter or whatever it is.
And I think that's the insinuation. And very often there won't be words or anything. There'll be sort of melancholy music playing in the background. That's a very common video to see.
So if we look at Free Palestine versus, what is the versus hashtag? Is it destroy Hamas? Is it Israel will win? Like what is the opposing?
Yeah, the number one pro-Israel hashtag is Stand With Israel. And then there are some others like Hamas is ISIS, bring them home, which refers to bringing home the hostages and so forth. But the main pro-Israel hashtag is Stand With Israel.
And what was the score on that you found?
The ratio fluctuates on a daily basis, but the December third or fourth reading, which is the last one I took a look at, the ratio of Free Palestine to Stand with Israel was 30-1. But then there are other hashtags. If I remember this correctly, 5 of the top 6 hashtags are all pro-Palestinian.
5 of the top 6.
Yeah. The way content spreads on TikTok is they will send out a video to 100 people. And if that video gets above average engagement, then they'll send it out to another 1,000 people. And if it continues to get above average engagement, then they'll send it to 10,000 people, and so on and so forth. And so really what happens is content can go viral if it grabs people's attention, which tends to promote the most sensational content. You compare that with a platform like X, which also, a lot of sensational content is circulating on X. However, there is a big difference on X, and this is also true of Instagram, by the way. In order to get distribution, you have to have built up in most cases, you have to have built up a following over, many, many, many months and years, right? So you have to consistently post content that interests people. And then you build up a large following, and then that large following buys you the ability to get large distribution. TikTok is quite different. You could have posted your first post on TikTok might have had 20 views. Your second post on TikTok might have had 50 views. Your third post on TikTok might have had 10 views. And then your fourth post can very easily have 40 million views. And so TikTok really tends to, the most engaging, in some cases, particularly around a conflict like Israel-Gaza, the most sensational content tends to get the most engagement, which therefore drives the most circulation. And I think the TikTok model is really brilliant for fun dancing videos and yoga videos, like you mentioned, and, cool rugby videos and so forth. But in my view, it's very, very, very scary in the context of a conflict like Israel-Gaza. And so you've got Free Palestine with a Palestinian flag and a heart. You've got Free Gaza and so on and so forth. Now, sometimes these hashtags are used together, so you can't just add these up, because like Free Palestine and Free Gaza might be used on the same post. So you can't just add the views to both. But we have a measure for how often, for instance, Free Palestine and Free Gaza co-occur. And when you sort of take into account all of that, the ratio has generally been around about 54-1.
54-1. And so it's actually an improvement now that we're 30-1, or is that 54-1 actually the...
No, so 54-1 is the ratio, when you look at all the top pro-Palestinian hashtags against all the...
So that's the actual score. It's like...
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Wow. 54-1.
The other piece to this that is important to know is that 54-1 wouldn't matter if Free Palestine wasn't a particularly large hashtag. It's one of the biggest hashtags across all of TikTok at the moment, up there with Taylor Swift and 2024 election related content. And if you look at the topics across TikTok that are trending at the moment, Free Palestine is right up there. And you hear anecdotally, the parents, for instance, of Jewish kids who continually tick not interested or select not interested on pro-Palestinian content, it still comes back into their feeds. It doesn't come back that regularly, but it comes back because there's so much inertia behind the pro-Palestinian content. And actually, here's a fun fact for you. It turns out that Free Palestine is the #1 hashtag in Israel as well. So it's not a hashtag that's likely to get a lot of engagement in Israel. Probably a lot of people in the country are selecting not interested. However, there's just so much momentum behind the hashtag that there really aren't many TikTok users who aren't seeing pro-Palestinian content fairly regularly. And then on the flip side, I think it's very, very rare that users are seeing pro-Israel content.
Wow. So this stuff is just generating. It has momentum. It's one of the top things on TikTok. And by the way, people who even aren't on TikTok, they get sent this stuff on their WhatsApps, right? So you actually get to see this even if you're not on TikTok.
Yeah, that's true.
That Free Palestine, Free Gaza is that just because there are more people in the world and young people in the world who believe this and think this way? Or is there something else going on here?
Social media companies will often say they're just a mirror that reflects back what society believes. But if you look at polling in the United States, there's a Pew Poll, for instance, quite a large one that was conducted last year, and it 60% of 18 to 29-year-olds have an unfavorable view of Israel, right? So you can assume that 60% of young Americans are sympathetic to the Palestinian side of this conflict. Now, if social media was just a mirror, you would then expect kind of TikTok's ratio of pro-Palestinian to pro-Israel content to be roughly 60-40, right? You certainly, embedded in the 54-1 spread is more like a 98% support for the Palestinian side of this conflict. So there's something, a little bit strange happening. And this is something I got to tell you, I haven't come to a conclusive answer on, and have actually spoken to the company about. We've had some high-level conversations with the TikTok leadership team just to point out that this is happening. There's a rise in 10x increase in anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses. As Jeff Morris Jr. pointed out, it's sort of hard to understand where that comes from. We shared this with the company and we said to them, why is it 54-1? If you are just reflecting back what people believe, shouldn't it be more like a 60-40 ratio? There were a few kind of hypotheses that we ran over and never really got a conclusive answer on them. In the United States, there are 7 million Jews and 3.5 million Muslims. Maybe one might assume that Jews are more sympathetic to the Israel side of this conflict and Muslims more sympathetic to the Palestinian side. However, in the world as a whole, there are 1.8 billion Muslims and 16 million Jews. And so one hypothesis we had is that there's a lot of cross-country flow. The Free Palestine content is getting created in countries with large Muslim populations and being imported into the United States. TikTok has an advertiser analytics platform, which is where I've been getting a lot of the data that I've been looking at. So when you look at this data, you can see that more than 50% of the posts on the Free Palestine hashtag, for instance, come from countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. And so one question we put to the TikTok team is, are you effectively importing a Pakistani worldview onto US college campuses? Because if that's so, that's a fairly irresponsible thing to be doing. Pakistan and the United States have very different worldviews. And the idea that TikTok might be importing quite a different worldview into the United States feels kind of scary. They said that there is not a lot of cross-country circulation, that content from countries like Indonesia and Malaysia doesn't make it into the United States. I don't start from a position of trusting the company when they say there isn't a lot of cross-country flow. And we do see some evidence that there is meaningful cross-country flow.
I don't even know who TikTok's leaders are. Obviously, there's a China connection, but what are they like? Like, were they, engaging? Did they know about this? Were they interested? What did they say to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had quite a few meetings with TikTok leadership. I've met their CEO, their COO, their head of trust and safety, their head of public policy. And, as people, they're all nice people. This is a challenging situation for them. Free Palestine has become a very trendy hashtag among a constituency that is very active on TikTok. And I think for them to take action on this hashtag would be a controversial thing. On the flip side, they express sympathy around anti-Semitism and what's happening among young people on college campuses in the United States. They did never affirmatively agree that there might be a direct connection between the content shown on their platform and what we see on US college campuses.
For me, the question is, okay, it's the so what question. So this stuff is all virtual. It all happens on your phones and you get outraged, but this stuff doesn't actually ever go into the real world, but it kind of looks like it is going into the real world, and people are creating more TikTok content in these demonstrations they're doing in the campuses and on the streets, or whatever they're doing, right? That's also becoming TikTok content.
Yeah, we knew there was a 54-1 spread, and we know there's been a 10x increase in anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses. The thing that had been missing was this connection between the two. Is what is happening on TikTok leading to real world? We actually conducted a survey of 1,300 Americans aged 18 to 29. They were in 47 states around the United States. And what we found in that survey was super interesting. For people who spent 30 minutes or more on TikTok a day, they were 17% more likely to hold anti-Semitic or anti-Israel views than people who don't use TikTok at all. And then you compare that with Instagram, where people who spent 30 minutes or more a day on Instagram were 6% more likely to hold anti-Semitic or anti-Israel views, and only 2% for X. And the nature of the questions we asked people were things like, do you think Jews are less likely to be honest in business than other Americans? Do you think Jews use the Holocaust to advance their political goals? Do you think Israel has a right to defend itself when attacked?
Do you believe that calling for the genocide of the Jews is harassment or hate speech.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a big topic. The university president, I would have thought it was fairly clear. I found that the responses to that question are fairly surprising.
Anthony, the thing I guess that worries me on many levels, but also as an Israeli, is when we're talking about TikTok, we're talking about young people. When these young people in the next 10, 20 years, when they get into Congress, what does that mean? What does that mean for America? And what does that mean for us, for Israelis? I mean, is the next Democratic president in, 8 years, 12 years, going to be a person who got their views about this conflict on TikTok?
It's certainly something that I worry about as well. I started out with a broad focus on social media, not specifically focused on TikTok. I looked at particularly Instagram data as well, and zeroed in on TikTok because for a couple of reasons. One is that the concentration of pro-Palestinian content is quite a lot higher on TikTok than it is on other social media platforms. And then the second part of this is that what you allude to, TikTok is particularly popular among the younger demographic. That's a demographic where views are a little bit less fixed and are in the process of being shaped. A lot of people quibble about headlines in the BBC or the New York Times. I mean, I think it is all immaterial compared to what is circulating on TikTok. I find it scary for the same reason that you find it scary.
That's where their ideas are, formed. Is it algorithmically weaponized? Is it enhanced? Or is it just, okay, there's more people doing this, so we're just going to show them more of that? How much do you know about their algorithm?
It's hard to know from the outside. There are certainly people in the United States who think it's crazy that we're heading into an election in 2024. TikTok is owned by a Chinese company. There was all this concern in previous elections around Russian misinformation. Now you have one of the most dominant distribution, places where news gets distributed being owned by China. And there are a heck of a lot of people who find that very scary and believe that TikTok should be banned. There are also people who believe that the ratio of 54-1 is an intentional move by China to sow division both among Americans themselves as well as between America and
how did you
one
make
of its
that connection?
allies. To be very clear, I'm not making that connection. I've seen data that sort of suggests that things that China doesn't want to circulate doesn't circulate, and things China does want to circulate does circulate. That's the extent to which I can make a comment about it.
The China angle seems to be like a big elephant in the room, but I do actually just want to go around the elephant or even underneath its legs just for a moment and move back into the algorithm. I'm trying to understand if the algorithm elevates pro-Palestinian content and turns down pro-Israel, or how much of this is almost kind of organically generated because there's more of them than there are pro-Israel versus a platform algorithmic thing going on?
In my view, if social media is just a reflection of what people believe, there's this 60-40 pro-Palestinian, pro-Israel polling figures in the United States, and you would expect that TikTok's distribution on the Israel-Hamas conflict would mirror that, and it doesn't. One hypothesis was what I shared earlier, that there's a lot of content flowing from overseas. Another thing we have seen is that since October 7, the ratio of Free Palestine to Stand with Israel has increased. It was closer to maybe 13-1 at the start of the conflict. And as I said, it's gone up to somewhere in the range of 54-1. Young people want to get their content to spread. And so people typically jump on the hashtags that are doing well, right? And it creates a bit of a virtuous cycle. And so you see these videos.
I wouldn't call it a virtuous cycle. I would call it like a unvirtuous cycle.
Maybe a self-fulfilling cycle.
It's like the blood libel that is just, it used to take days, weeks, months, for a blood libel to travel to another village, another town, and then the Jews will get pogromed. We're talking about a digital manifestation of this blood libel that is just gone viral around the world unbelievably fast.
Yeah, no, I agree. You see this phenomenon where people jump onto a hashtag that is gaining momentum. And so, it might have been that there was somebody who used to give style tips on something people have seen quite a lot of. You had a creator that used to give a lot of style tips, how to be fashionable and so forth on TikTok. And they've now converted to creating videos that show you how to wrap the kefir, because, that's doing well at the moment. Another example is you might have had a makeup artist, obviously. Now that makeup artist shows you how to paint the Palestinian flag on your cheek with makeup. So, as the hashtag does better, people sort of switch their focus to jump onto content that is consistent with that,
Right.
amplifies a certain hashtag, which then helps to turn it into, what Free Palestine is today on TikTok, which is one of the largest hashtags across all of TikTok.
That is interesting and scary at the same time. I don't know if it was you or Jeff that said that TikTok is the number one search engine for more than half of Gen Z. I find this interesting also because we did an episode on Telegram and how to search Telegram and how to find stuff was not obvious to people. Do you know anything about how people find these hashtags? How do you get someone who was an influencer on home deco or yoga or fashion? How do they find this stuff? They weren't weren't looking at the stuff at all.
I mean, the primary medium for TikTok is what's called the For You page. Part of what people love about it is it's so frictionless. You open up the app, it starts sending you videos. It notices the patterns of what you do and don't engage in, and it sends you more of what you do engage with and sends you less of what you don't engage with. Now, the consequence of Free Palestine being so large on the platform is when you get onto, let's say you're a new user, you get onto TikTok, it probably will not be too many videos that you need to wait for before you see a Free Palestine video. We haven't measured this, but let's say you might see a Free Palestine video in your first 3 to 4 videos, and then if you engage with that video, you dig it or you
hate it.
Yeah, which in either direction, you'll either see more or you will see fewer of those videos. And so the For You page really is the number one way that people engage with TikTok.
And I know that the algorithm behind that is a little bit vague, but it sounds like there's a disproportionate representation, a complete imbalance. There's much more pro-Palestinian narrative than pro-Israeli perspective. It's not even close.
Yeah, not at all.
Okay.
One thing to finish off with is just the sense of scale, just to give people a sense of just what the scale is of TikTok. There are meaningfully more views on pro-Palestinian videos on TikTok than there are visits to all of the top 10 mainstream media sites in the United States. And so that's the New York Times and CNN and so forth. The video views on TikTok just dwarf, the engagement with mainstream media platforms. And I just say that because I said earlier, some people quibble with some coverage from the New York Times or CNN or the BBC. But to the extent that you quibble with the coverage on those platforms and it bothers you, I think what's going on TikTok might be a little bit less visible, but in my view, much more of a significant issue as far as you said earlier, shaping the views of the people who will be the elected officials and people in power in the next generation.
You've spoken to the company, and also you, on your X Twitter account, you have forwarded people to a TikTok newsroom statement on this, and I can link to that in the show notes. I also see the hashtag from the river to the sea. I mean, is that not a hashtag that TikTok should kind of remove?
Yeah, I mean, it's been pointed out to them. My sense is that TikTok want to make the smallest number of editorial changes that they can. Every time they make an editorial change, they claim to be a platform, not a site that has, call it editorial oversight of its content. That being said, they have taken down content in the past. They've taken down White Lives Matter. They've taken down All Lives Matter content. They've taken down content around things like, there was the infamous Osama bin Laden letter to America relatively recently. There's been a lot of extreme dieting content on TikTok, self-harm content. They get rid of all of it. Their mission statements is bring joy and inspire creativity, and they have a community principle, prevent harm. And supposedly they are supposed to take down content that can be linked to harm. I think there is a fairly clear relationship between the 54-to-1 ratio of content that they're showing. People who spend more than 30 minutes a day on TikTok are 17% more likely to hold anti-Semitic views. And then that translates to a 10x increase in anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses. I think there is a fairly robust link between TikTok and the company has chosen not to take action in this case.
Yeah. I think that there are listeners who would be interested in this. In the Telegram episode we did previously, I asked my guest, how do you win on TikTok? How do you even the odds? Specifically on Jews in Israel, the numbers, it's 2 billion against 16 million or, 20 million. How does that work?
Look, I think it's very hard. I'm not sure I have good answers here. Free Palestine is now this sort of viral social movement. I think TikTok had a role in making it a viral social movement, but that's what it is today. I'm not sure I have a good, clean, easy answer on how to fix this. I think
Come on, it's a war. We need good, clean, easy answers.
In my view, this ought to be pushed back onto the company. There is harm being created here. There's a 10x increase in anti-Semitic attacks. And in my view, TikTok is wholly inequipped to be a major news source and should not be distributing news that is leading to real world harm, and frankly shouldn't be distributing news full stop. Imagine the New York Times or CNN showed a 54-1 slant on their coverage. I mean, there would be absolute outrage. TikTok is larger and distributing news to more people than CNN and the New York Times, and they're getting away with spreading news that has an unbelievably strong bias to it.
So then I guess it takes us back to our opening question, and we can close out with this. Having taken us on a journey of TikTok as this young people's search engine, news provider, way of life, communities, let's ask that question again. Why do high school students in San Francisco hate Israel so much? And some of it seems to have a lot to do with TikTok.
Yeah, at least that's my hypothesis. You see 54-1 ratio of very sad videos. Video after video after video. It makes you sad, it makes you angry, and then you look for an outlet.
Yeah. I'm super grateful to be given the opportunity. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your openness and your patience with my interruptions and dejargonization.
Thanks for having me.
From the river to the sea, Palestine gonna be free. River to the sea, river to the what? Let's go. River to the sea.
Thanks for listening to the Dejargonizer. For more episodes and ways to connect with me, please visit dejargonizerpod.com. That's dejargonizerpod.com.